Have you ever been in a situation where your family treats you like you are invisible and the only person who cherishes and values you disappears? Helplessness, hurt, pain, and resentment are all things I have experienced over the years. I am Marceline Cross, 34, once the darling of the family in Naperville, Illinois. But now I am nothing. It all started in a cramped little coffee shop in the Chicago suburbs. My hands trembled around my steaming mug. The TV was on with an old interview, and there she was, my mother, Verna, her voice cutting through the din of the place. She was sobbing, crocodile tears streaming down her makeup-covered face, mourning my death 12 years ago. Marceline was our light, she said, choking back tears, clutching a tissue. Except I was alive, breathing. The coffee shop was a haze of black smoke, and the smell of baking bread hung in the air. A few baristas chatted behind the counter, oblivious to the fact that my world was falling apart. I couldn't move. The feeling of being trapped was just a painful shock that seeped into my bones. My mother's voice was steady, each word a hammer to me, until the screen switched to an ad for some kind of expensive car insurance. I fumbled for my phone, my hands still shaking, and opened Twitter. My thumb swiped through the noise until I landed on it, a post from my sister, Celine. Today marks 12 years since we lost our little sister, Marceline. We miss her. Attached was a photo, a gravestone, cold and gray, with my name engraved on it, Marceline Cross, 199120013. I held my breath. The date was wrong. I was 19 when they kicked me out, not killed me. But it was there, immortalized in stone, like an entry in some sick family scrapbook. My name on that tombstone hit me like a rusted knife twisted into my chest. No note. No apology. There was no, hey, we missed you, no warm words, no hint of regret, just a cold, emotionless slab of stone screaming that I was gone, erased from their lives as if I had never existed. I stood there, frozen, staring at the phone screen, the world around me quieting into a meaningless hum. My hand tightened around the phone, my knuckles turning white as the weight of it pressed down. They hadn't just turned their backs on me. They'd erased me from their story, leaving nothing but a void where I had been. Was that all I had ever been to them? A ghost to be exorcised? I stumbled upon it, a photo someone had tagged on social media, a snapshot from some family gathering in Naperville, a perfect suburb with manicured lawns, white picket fences, and cul-de-sacs that looked like they were taken from a sitcom. That's where I grew up, where I thought I belonged. But there it was, a headstone, my name etched into it, plain and simple, set in the backyard like a twisted monument. No calls, no texts, no, hey, Mina, we're done with you, just a silent, cruel declaration that I was dead to them. My chest tightened, a sharp pain throbbing behind my ribs. Did they hate me so much? So unforgivable that they'd go so far as to erase me? For 12 long years, I had pieced myself back together in Seattle, fighting my way through life as an independent investigative journalist. It hadn't been easy. There were sleepless nights, empty bank accounts, and endless deadlines. But I'd pulled myself up from the ground up, determined to prove I didn't need them. I'd told myself I'd moved on, that family was a closed chapter, a distant memory I'd buried deep. Verna's cold gaze, the way her eyes could pierce me like a winter wind, had faded from my mind, or so I'd thought. Harold's quiet judgment, his refusal to intervene or speak up, was background noise I'd tuned out. And Celine's smugness, the smirk she'd flashed whenever she'd passed me by, was deemed irrelevant, a relic of a past I'd moved on from. I had built a wall around those memories, brick by brick, convincing myself that they could no longer reach me. I had trained myself to believe that I didn't care, but that day, standing in that coffee shop, everything I had built began to crumble. The TV played my own obituary, my mother's fake tears and shaky voice played over and over like a warped replay I had never subscribed to. Every word she spoke, every sob she forced out, hit me like a hammer, chipping away at the armor I had spent more than a decade forging. I was no longer sure of anything. The pain welled up inside me, exploding in my chest with a force I couldn't ignore. I stumbled to a booth, my legs wobbly, and slid onto the old chair. My hands shook as I set down my coffee, the cup now cold, forgotten in the storm of what I had just seen. I pulled my laptop out of my bag, its familiar weight making me pause for a moment. Flipping it open, I stared at the blank screen, my fingers hovering over the keys, trembling with indecision. Part of me wanted to slam it shut, walk away, pretend I hadn't seen anything, but the rest, The stubborn, angry part that had kept me alive all these years wouldn't let go. I started digging. Public records, online archives, anything I could find. It didn't take long. There it was. A death certificate issued in 2013, stamped and sealed by the state of Illinois. Marceline Cross, dead. Cause of death, vague, accidental, no details, just enough to be legal. I stared at the screen, the light bouncing off my wide eyes. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't a mistake. This was the truth. Cold, calculated, official. On paper, I no longer existed. My family hadn't just cut me out of their lives, they'd buried me. And for what? I still didn't know. I slammed my laptop shut, my coffee long gone cold. The pain was still there, dull, but something else was growing with it, a slow, insidious determination. I wouldn't let this go. I'd spent too much time running from them, not anymore. I would find out why they'd gone so far, why they'd turned me into a ghost. I sat in my tiny Seattle apartment, the dim light of a desk lamp casting shadows over a pile of papers. They hadn't just disowned me. They'd killed me for money. Rain pounded relentlessly against the windows, my apartment barely big enough for a bed and a desk. Papers, scribbled notes, and my laptop formed a makeshift crime scene, one I'd pieced together myself. I'd been up for hours, chasing the truth since the coffee shop revelation, and now it was staring me in the face. My family hadn't just disowned me, they'd turned me into a corpse for profit. I started with the death certificate I'd found online. It was the first clue I pulled, and it was quickly unraveled. Digging deeper, I mastered the computer hacking skills I'd learned as a journalist, and there it was. A financial trail leading to a $2 million inheritance from my grandmother, the only person in that family who ever cared about me. The money was supposed to be mine, taken out of her will when she died a year later and I was evicted. But the accounts? The funds had disappeared into a trust controlled by Verna and Celine, signed by a slick lawyer. They'd fake my death to reclaim it, erasing me to fill their pockets. My mind took me back to the day they kicked me out. 19 years old, standing in the rain with a tattered suitcase. Verna's voice still echoed in my head, sharp and venomous. "How dare you love a homosexual? Blasphemy. You're not my daughter anymore," she screamed at me for loving Riley, a girl with fiery eyes and paint-stained hands, a free spirit who didn't fit the perfect Naperville mold. Harold just stood there, silent as ever, letting Verna wield her wrath like a guillotine. I staggered out that night, tears mingling with the pouring rain, thinking I'd lost everything. No one cared about me but my grandmother, who went looking for me. She found me a week later, following me to a rundown motel. My grandma held me in her arms, smelling faintly of lavender, and whispered, "You've suffered enough, I'll make it up to you." That inheritance was her last gift to me, and they stole it. Verna with her charity lunches, Harold with his secret fortune, Celine with her glamorous Instagram life. I was a bug, a weirdo who wouldn't cooperate. Loving Riley was my crime, and they punished me by wiping me out of their lives. But this wasn't just rejection, it was greed, cold and calculating. They had turned my life into a payment, and each click I made revealed more of their dirt. I opened an old email account that Celine had abandoned years ago. She'd been so careless to leave it active. The password was her birthday. We had shared that since we were close. Close? I suddenly felt funny because I remembered that I was once loved by my sister. Buried in my inbox was a thread from 2013, shortly after I'd fled to Seattle. Verna's words glared at me. "Get rid of her, Riley. Leave Marceline, or I'll make sure you regret it." There were threats, legal, financial, even the vaguest hint of something physical. Riley hadn't ignored me like I thought. She hadn't abandoned me because she stopped caring. They'd hunted her, threatened her, forced her out of my life. My first love, the one I'd mourned for years. My family had broken her too. I leaned back in my chair, its creaking echoing in the quiet room. My chest tightened, a mix of anger and grief rising. For 12 years, I'd carried the burden of Riley's supposed abandonment, blaming myself for not being good enough. I replayed our last call, her trembling voice saying she couldn't stay, and thought I'd let her down. But it wasn't me, it was them. Verna's cruelty, Celine's complicity, Harold's cowardice. They'd torn us apart and buried the evidence. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms until they ached. Tears blurred my vision. I was no longer a victim, and knowing that lit a fire inside me. They had taken everything, my home, my love, my name, but me. I would find a way to go back, to expose their lies and make them choke on the truth. This wasn't over, it had only just begun. I stood in front of the mirror wearing a sleek black dress, practicing a cold, sharp smile. They wanted me to be a ghost? Fine, I would haunt them. The dim light from my nightlight flickered across my Seattle apartment, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. The faint ticking of the wall clock cut through the silence, counting down the hours until I could carry out my plan. My suitcase lay open on the bed, half filled with clothes and evidence, ready for the trip back to Chicago. The air smelt faintly of rain, and the lavender candle I'd lit to calm my nerves. This wasn't just a return, it was a reckoning, and I was preparing for war. I'd spent weeks gathering ammunition, each a fragment of betrayal I'd returned to them. Have you ever been invisible in your own family? When people you once trusted turn their backs on you, erase your name from memory as if you never existed? Do you forgive or stand up and reclaim your worth? It started with Celine, she spoke carelessly, and carelessly, after a few drinks, I spent days piecing together Celine's clues, scrolling through her carefully curated social media posts until I pinned down her location, a swanky bar in Naperville where drinks cost more than a meal. I grabbed a cheap recorder phone and dialed her number. My voice softened into a sympathetic stranger's voice, and she let it all out, bragging about how they'd manhandled me, how they'd twisted my life into a knot to secure her money for themselves. Her words dripped with arrogance, each one a smug little trophy she waved, oblivious to the fact that I was recording every damning sound. That voice, once just an annoying echo from my childhood, became a weapon, loaded and locked in my arsenal, ready to fire when the time came. I understood better now. They had taken her from me, just as they had taken my home, my future, everything. They stole it all, I argued to my reflection, brushing a lock of hair out of my eyes. Now I'm going to get it back. I paced the room, rummaging through my things. The tape recorder lay on the table, its tiny red light blinking like a heartbeat. Emails were stacked neatly beside it, a paper trail of their greed. The death certificate glared at me, my name written in bold black ink, a lie I would strangle them to death. I was in no hurry. Revenge wasn't a sprint. It was a game of chess, and I was 3 moves ahead. They thought they had won. I was aiming for their 40th wedding anniversary. Verna and Harold always did it big. Hundreds of guests, flowing champagne, a chance to flaunt their perfect little empire. It would be held in some swanky Chicago mansion, the kind that screamed old wealth and fake smiles. They would be high, basking in admiration, surrounded by their closest friends. That's when I'd strike, when they were most exposed, most proud. I would step in, throw the truth like a grenade, and watch their world burn. The thought made me shiver, not with fear, but with something darker, something hungry. No rush, no qualms. I waited. I planned. I would hit them where it hurt. My hands were steady now, the tremor from the coffee shop long gone. I had rehearsed each step in my head. I could almost hear Verna's shrill denial, see Celine's smug face twist. I grabbed my coat and headed for the airport, the weight of my suitcase tugging at my arm as I stepped into the drizzle. The taxi's headlights cut through the darkness, and I slid into the back seat, my heart pounding, not with doubt, but with purpose. The flight to Chicago awaited, and so did my moment. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of theirs. I leaned my head against the window, watching the streaks of rain pass by, and whispered to myself, "The game begins." I stepped into the Chicago mansion, the chandeliers glaring, fake laughter echoing off the walls. They had no idea I was the storm about to ruin their party. The air was thick with expensive perfume and money, old, brittle, and stuffy. Crystal glasses clinked as guests mingled, their voices low over the soft jazz from a live band in the corner. The place was a monument to opulence, marble floors, gold-trimmed walls, and a grand staircase that spoke of opulence. I smoothed my black dress, the fabric cool against my skin, and took a deep breath. This was it, their 40th anniversary party, their moment to shine, and I was here to ruin it. I scanned the room, picking them out like targets in a long line. Verna stood near the bar, resplendent in her blood-red dress, laughing too loudly, too well. Harold lingered nearby, sipping a glass of whiskey, his face a mask of quiet resignation, as always. Celine glided between the groups of guests, her blonde hair catching the light, her smile perfect as she charmed a suit-clad figure in a tuxedo. They hadn't spotted me yet, blending into the crowd with my head bowed, just another face in a sea of strangers. My pulse pounded, steady and sure as I approached a large screen dedicated to their cheesy tribute video. I reset, the evidence ready, time to rewrite the script. I plugged in my drive and the screen flickered to life. and the jazz faded as heads turned, curious. First came the death certificate, my name in black letters, dated 2013. A gasp filled the room. Then came the emails, Verna's threats to Riley, scrolling slowly and deliberately, followed by the bank records showing the $2 million of Grandma's money had been deposited into their account. The punchline? Celine's voice, slurred and smug from that bar recording. We took care of Marceline, clean and easy, right into the trust. The room was dead silent, hundreds of eyes darting back and forth between me and them. I stepped forward, mic in hand, and let my voice break the silence. Verna's face twisted, her scream piercing the silence. "She's lying! It's all fake!" she screamed, lunging at me as if she could claw at the truth. Celine froze, her mouth moving in vain, excuses spilling out of her mouth like, "I didn't mean to, it wasn't like that," but the crowd didn't buy it. Whispers spread like wildfire, and the guests backed away, their faces a mixture of shock and disgust. Harold just stared at Verna, his glass shaking in his hand, something broken behind his eyes. This time, he didn't stay silent. He turned away slowly and deliberately, as if he were seeing her for the first time. The perfect facade of the family crumbled, and I stood there watching it fall apart. I saved the best for last. "Oh, and Riley," I said, my voice even, loud enough to be heard. "She's alive. They forced her out of my life, threatened to make her go into hiding, but I found her, and she's willing to testify if I need her to." I locked eyes with Verna, then Celine, letting the weight of it sink in. They didn't just kill me. They tried to kill her. The room erupted in whispers, phones slipping from pockets as people began recording, texting, spreading chaos beyond these walls. Their empire wasn't just crumbling, it was spreading. I turned and walked out, my heels clicking on the hallway, leaving them in ruins. Verna's wails followed me down the hallway. "Marceline, you ungrateful!" But I didn't look back. The cool night air hit my face as I stepped outside, the city lights fading into streaks of gold and white. My chest felt lighter, as if I'd lifted a burden I'd carried for 12 years. This wasn't the end, it was victory, the first blow. They'd built their lives on my grave, and I'd just kicked dirt in their faces. The storm had come, and I was gone. Leaving them to drown in the flood, I sat in a small studio, the microphone inches from my lips, the red recording light blinking like a pulse. They buried me alive, but now I tell my story. Seattle rain drummed softly against the window, a familiar soundtrack to my new beginning. The studio was cozy, low lighting, a chipped wooden table, and the smell of warm, bitter coffee wafting through the air. My laptop lit up with an open audio file, the waveform spiking with every word I spoke. This wasn't just a room, it was a battlefield where I had won. A place where the ghosts they'd turned me into could finally speak. I leaned into the microphone, breathing steadily, and let the truth flow. The aftermath of that night hit them like a freight train. Harold filed for divorce a week after the party, his signature on the paperwork a quiet rebellion against Verna's decades of control. He didn't fight me for the inheritance, he just signed the transfer, returning the $2 million to my name as if he were too tired to keep lying. Celine's perfect little world collapsed. Her business partners dropped out, her social media feeds darkened in a torrent of hateful comments, and her name became a laughingstock in Naperville gossip circles. Verna, she was facing a fraud investigation, and the falsified death certificate and shady bank transfers were finally catching up with her. The police were sniffing around, and last I heard, she had hired a lawyer desperately trying to save her life. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. They had destroyed themselves, and I had taken back what was mine. I poured it all into the ghost they made, every ugly detail, every hidden scar. The first episode dropped a month after Chicago, my voice raw and unfiltered as I recounted how they erased me, how I fought back. I don't sugarcoat it, the nights on the streets, the pain of losing Riley, the rage that fueled me. It hit hard. Downloads skyrocketed overnight. Reviews called it painful and hellishly real. Soon I was getting hundreds of emails from people like me, outcasts, abandoned children, people made invisible by their own families. "You gave me hope," one wrote. "I'm not alone," another said. The podcast didn't just tell my story. It built a lifeline, a thread connecting all of us who had been left in the dark. I am a phoenix rising from the ashes they burned. My wings are no longer broken, and I am flying higher than they could ever reach. I spent 12 years as their shadow, a name on a tombstone they thought they had sealed, but now I was louder than ever, my voice echoing across the airwaves, my truth like a flame in the night. The money was good. Hell, it paid for the studio, a decent apartment, a life I had built from scratch. But this was bigger. It was a power not just over them, but over the past they had tried to tie me to. Each episode was a brick in a new foundation, one they could not touch. Then came Riley. I had followed her to Portland, living under an assumed name, painting canvases that now sell for thousands of dollars. We met at a quiet coffee shop, the kind with mismatched chairs and indie music playing in the background. She looked different, older, her wild hair braided, her hands still smeared with paint, but those fiery eyes were the same. We didn't fall in love again, too much time had passed, too many wounds. Instead, we sat there, two survivors sharing coffee and stories, piecing together the years they'd stolen. I never stopped thinking about you, she said, her voice soft. They made me run away, but I didn't want to. We weren't lovers anymore, but we were something else. Companions in healing, bound together by the wreckage they left behind. I finished the latest episode, a monotone goodbye. They buried me alive, but I'm the ghost show that never dies. I pressed pause, the red light faded to black, and leaned back in my chair. A smile spread across my face, the rain outside slowed to a drizzle, and I felt free. Not just free from them, but free from the burden I'd carried all these years. Verna, Celine, Harold, they were the ones in the dark now, struggling, cowering, while I stood in the light. I had turned my pain into a megaphone, turned my loss into a bridge to others. This wasn't just victory, it was rebirth, and I was finally alive. If you've ever been rejected from your family because you're true to yourself, if you've ever sat in the dark listening to the people who are supposed to love you preach about your pain as cold and distant, you're not alone. I know, there are wounds that no one can see, but the good news is, you're still here, you're still strong, and like me, you still have the right to rewrite your own story, even if others have long since tried to write it off. I want to hear your story. Have you ever been hurt by those closest to you? Have you ever been forgotten, rejected, or even erased from your family's memory? Share it in the comments, even if it's just a few lines. It might be a small ray of light, but enough to warm someone who's quietly watching. And if this story touches a deep place in your heart, please like, share this video with a friend, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the stories that really need to be heard. Thank you for staying until the end.